And yes, we are recording. You probably heard that message too. So we'll be making our recordings available after these webinars. So we've been working on short-term rental regulations program, meaning we're working on the regulations and the ordinance for enforcement and other related aspects of our short-term rentals. We are looking for comments from the public through December 14th. For some of you who might have been participating earlier, we had extended that time frame from the end of November to give a bit more time for anybody who wants to provide comments. Let me start by introducing our staff team. And again, I'm Leslie Ellis. Tawn Hillenbrand, who you see here, is the project manager, and she's been doing a big part of the work on this project. Thank you, Tawn. And Matt Lafferty, who's our principal planner, has been a tremendous help and been with the county and worked through the first round of standards in the Estes Valley and with the county when we prepared our standards in 2019. Amy White, our co-compliance supervisor, has also been here and seen through a number of those steps and working on the ordinance piece. This webinar is geared for folks who are generally outside of the Estes Valley area. We had a meeting and a webinar on November 1st for the Estes Valley area, and we heard a lot of great input there. You'll hear more about the whole schedule and how you can participate from Tawn. A couple quick points to make. This is an initial public draft. There are going to be more public drafts and edits probably up until the adoption hearing in 2023. The project started in spring of this year and will continue through early 2023. With adoption, at that time. And the project, while right now it includes draft regulations, will also look at the enforcement ordinance, and that can be presented in about the same time frame. So what you see in this discussion draft will likely change before we get to the finish line, and your comments here tonight and in writing and any other way you want to send comments will help make a difference in what gets refined and finalized. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tawn and Matt, who will explain to you more about the process, the timeline, the proposed ideas, and how to participate in this webinar. So thank you very much for being here. I see we have over 60 people who've joined us, so that's really great to see you all here, and we look forward to your comments. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Tawn.
Test your video too, please.
Well, thank you all. It's great having you all join us today. As Leslie indicated, this is the short-term rental regulations update initial public discussion draft webinar for those in unincorporated Larimer County outside of the Estes Valley. So on the screen in front of you now, just before we proceed, you'll see that there is a link to our short-term rental regulations update project website. So I will show this again, but it is a helpful place if you would like some background information on the project, where we've been, what we've completed, and then where we're going timeline-wise. And I will touch upon those things too in this presentation. So the intent of today's initial public discussion draft regulations webinar is to present a brief presentation providing the background and timeline on the short-term rental regulations update, to present the initial public discussion draft of suggested revisions to the regulations, focusing on unincorporated Larimer County outside of the Estes Valley, and to gather feedback and specific suggestions from the community and interested parties on short-term rental regulations. So the information gathered at today's webinar, and then as well as the information we gathered last week at the Estes Valley webinar, will help the county staff and officials determine what, if any, changes or revisions need to be made to the draft regulations. So in front of you, this is just some helpful information, today's agenda. So as you see, we'll provide about a 15-20 minute brief presentation, and then from about 6:20 to 6:25 we'll open the floor for participant feedback, and then we'll follow up in summation and a closing statement for about 5 minutes from 7:25 to 7:30. So a few instructions prior to proceeding. We do ask attendees you will remain muted upon entry into the webinar, and video is disabled, as Leslie mentioned, and I think Matt may have mentioned that rather. Then our team will ask you to use the raise hand control at the bottom of your screen if you wish to provide comments during the comment period. which will be after this presentation. And then if you wish to ask questions, we please ask you to use the Q&A control at the bottom of your screen, and then saving the comment period for that suggestions or comments. And then please maintain civility when speaking. So on the screen before you is the updating the regulations process timeline. This process is approximately an 8 to 9 month process. So we've been working on this for some time. So you'll see in the green font the completed to date. So from July to August of 2022, we did have an STR, or short-term rental community questionnaire, that was available to the community. And we gathered some very valuable feedback from that questionnaire. And then from August 19th and on August 15th, we hosted 2 community open houses, one of which took place in Estes Park, and then one was countywide. And then on September 14th, we had a Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners work session where we discussed community feedback and possible options for revisions to the existing short-term rental regulations. And then for the month of October, we did additional stakeholder engagement. So that included such folks as the fire districts, and then other towns and cities, local jurisdictions. And then we also did some additional data analysis. And so all that gave us the information and some really good insight into how to draft the current regulations that are now available for your viewing. So the first current process where we are now is the first draft of revision options. So this, we've had community feedback and input through an Estes Valley webinar, which took place on November 1st. And then here we are November 7th for the countywide webinar. And then much of the presentation, pretty much all of it, is exactly the same as what we presented to Estes Valley. So what you'll see here today. And then next week or later in this week, rather, on November 9th, we will have another Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners work session where we will, again, with them, discuss the draft regulations and then go over any preliminary feedback that we have received thus far from the community on those revisions. And then on November 17th, we will have a discussion with the Estes Valley Planning Advisory Committee. And then November 30th, which this actually is an error, we have since updated this date to December 14th. So community comments on the draft are now due December 14th rather on November 30th to provide a little more time for the community to review. And then in early December, we'll have the Red Feather Lakes Advisory Committee discussion to go over the drafts. And then the intent is that in early of 2023, we will have a public hearing draft going, and those will likely get potential additional public workshops or meetings may take place prior to adoption to get additional feedback. And again, just here as a friendly reminder, the project webpage where you can get additional information in this timeline is there at the bottom of the screen. And something to keep in mind too before we proceed, we are simultaneously working on revisions to the code enforcement ordinance, and we do intend to have those materials as they become available. We will post them for public review, but do know those will be coming here later at the end of the year and prior to adoption of the new regulations. So those code enforcement changes will be available. So the initial public draft discussion regulations. So the draft includes all the current land use code standards for short-term rentals as referenced throughout the land use code. So when you access the draft, which is available on that project website, you can review. We have 2 options. We have a redlined option, which shows you all the edits that have been made, and then we have a clean copy. So this gives you an idea of what that document and how it is broken down. So the potential changes that are reflected in are and they reflect the analysis and the public input that we have received on this project since the beginning of the spring 2022. So community input and feedback was received through, like I mentioned previously, community questionnaire, 2 community open houses, direct comment through email to the project staff, and then stakeholder engagement. And then the contents of the draft document has been organized for ease of understanding and is organized as following and is listed on the screen in front of you. So introduction and overview begins the draft document, and then we go into proposed land use code changes. New and revised definitions, short-term rentals and zoning districts outside the Estes Valley. So this is Article 3 of the current land use code, and then use-specific standards for Landmark County, including the Estes Valley, which is Article 3, and then supplemental regulations for the Estes Valley, which is Article 13. And some of this will become a little more clear when we do show you the draft document, and Matt will touch upon these. But this is just to give you a quick overview. So the red line version, like I said, will highlight helpful information. So the red line version is the one we suggest if you are reviewing. As it is, it will show you what is existing, what is being proposed. So notes or points of clarification are noted in cream colored boxes as you see here on the screen. So these are just helpful tidbits as you move along the code. And then proposed changes are indicated in blue font with a strikeout, as seen here in the middle of the screen, for changes or removal, and the new additions are blue and underlined. And then multiple options or points for further discussion are highlighted in yellow. So there are a few multiple options, and those mainly you'll see if you're looking at the Estes Valley regulations, there are some multiple options to choose from. But again, this just gives you a highlight as to where we may say here's one option 1 and option 2. So quickly to go over the new and revised definitions. So in our current land use code, short-term rental regulations or short-term rentals are defined as small and large. So a small is a short-term rental with 10 or fewer occupants who are part of one party or single group of renters. And then a large is greater than 10 occupants of one party or a single group of renters. So in the revised regulations, short-term rentals, we are proposing full and limited short-term rentals, whereas small and large definitions will remain the same. So a full short-term rental would be unlimited or unrestricted in the number of nights rented per year, whereas a limited STR would be restricted to no more than 135 nights per year, or another number depending on the conversations and the feedback we received. And that would be calculated from October 1st through September 30th. And then current regulations, we currently define bed and breakfast, small and large. And that is currently an owner or operator occupied dwelling where short-term lodging is provided to transient guests. And like the standard short-term rental, it is defined by small and large, the less than 10 and greater than 10. And in the revised regulations, we are proposing that short-term rental bed and breakfast be changed to short-term rental hosted. And that would be a principal dwelling occupied by a full-time resident owner living on site where short-term lodging less than 30 days is provided to transient guests. Again, this information is contained within the draft regulations, but we thought it would be helpful to throw this out so you all could review it before we jump into the draft document. And these, one thing to keep in mind as you are reviewing the short-term rental revisions, for those, the full short-term rental and limited revisions or suggested changes, this is suggested in part to be sure that these short-term rental types are going to work in the setting in which they're being proposed. So for instance, we have accommodation zone districts as well as commercial or residential. And so this is just to further ensure that they are working with those areas. So and then one additional addition or revision to the definitions would be a new bed and breakfast inn. So this would be an establishment operated in a primary dwelling or portion thereof, which provides accommodations to overnight guests, a meal limited to guests only, and that it is occupied by the owner or operator of such establishment. So this would just replace, since we would be renaming the bed and breakfast. So again, before we jump into the draft regulations, we wanted to highlight or give you a moment to look over our current approval processes. So these remain the same, but this will give you an idea when you were looking at the tables of permitted uses and what has been modified or changed to keep these definitions in mind as you look at those tables. And again, this is pointed out in that draft document as well. So uses permitted by right are represented by an R And so the cell would indicate that the use is permitted by right in the respective zoning district. So permitted uses are subject to all other applicable regulations of the code. And then site plan review would be represented by an SP on the use table. So the use is permitted in the respective zoning district with approval of site plan review, which is subject to the regulations of the code. And this review procedure does not include public notification of neighbors, but it does include a referral process to other agencies. So getting feedback from agencies on the use, and the decision would be made by the planning director. So it's administrative. And then from there, it goes up to then administrative special review, which is represented by an AS in the use table. And so the use would only be permitted in that respective zoning district with approval of administrative special review. And the review procedure includes public notification of all neighbors and referral to other agencies. And the decision, once again, is made by the planning director. In this particular case, you'll see with the revisions or the suggested modifications to the regulations that we are adding an asterisk with the AS, and this represents that the administrative special review would require, in this particular case, would be a public hearing before the Board of County Commissioners. Generally, administrative special review currently does not require a public hearing unless the planning director requires to go so, therefore, to elevate it to a public hearing. So with an AS and an asterisk, this indicates that the use would require the approval process noted, but would also require a public hearing before the Board of County Commissioners. In this particular case, then, the decision would be made by the Board of County Commissioners. And then our next up approval process would be the special review, which is designated by an S. So the use is only permitted in the respective zoning district with approval of special review. And this review procedure includes public notification of all neighbors, referral to all agencies, and a public hearing before the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners. The Planning Commission essentially gives a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and it is the Board of County Commissioners that would make the ultimate decision. And then if a use is prohibited, it is a blank cell on our use tables. So there would be no letters represented. So at this time, with all that wonderful information in mind, I will switch it over now to Matt, and Matt is going to go ahead and show a PDF copy of the draft regulations redline version, and he will go through that briefly through sections, highlighting certain aspects of the regulations as they pertain to the county-wide outside of Estes Valley.
Thank you, Ton. And thank you, everybody, for participating tonight. And I'm going to share screen here real quick, and we'll look at, I want to show you two things, just really just to help out. The first screen, this is, sorry, that's the wrong screen. It's what it looks like, but it's not going to let me do what I want to do. I guess I won't show that screen because I can't find it. I was going to show you how to get onto our webpage just to make sure that you could get there, but we'll be fine. If you need any assistance, just let us know, and we'll share a way to get there, as well as Ton has put some notes in her later slides that will show how to get onto the webpage if you haven't found it already. So attached and on your screen right now is a copy of the redline version of our land use code amendments that are currently being put out for public comment. And as Leslie said, and as it says here in the introduction and overview, this is just an initial draft. This is not final. These are not absolute regs yet. Some of this stuff is going to fall out. Some of we might be able to add some things to it. So this is just a working draft, and really we're trying to evoke comment from the public so that we can improve our regulations as it relates to some of your thoughts and ideas. And keeping in mind what Ton said, anything that's in blue text and underlined is new text, and anything that's got a strike through is being removed from the regulations, or is proposed to be removed from the regulations. I'm not going to spend a lot of time up here. You can read through that if you go on. I'm just going to move directly into some of the changes that are going on, keeping in mind that what we're seeing here right now, this first section, are proposed changes that would apply to unincorporated portions of Larimer County throughout the county, regardless of whether it's in unincorporated Larimer County outside of the Estes Valley or unincorporated Larimer County in the Estes Valley. These regulations will apply that we're preparing to show you at this time. So as Ton had indicated, and I'm going to briefly reiterate some of the things that she kind of covered, our bed and breakfast regulations have been in place for quite a while. They didn't, at one time they talked about serving food and then that went away. It's basically been a use that's bounced around, and we think it more appropriately sounds better as a short-term rental that's being hosted. And so we're proposing that the bed and breakfast regulation, as we currently know it, is going to be stricken from the code. It will be replaced with a new definition of bed and breakfast in as Ton described it. And that's going to be an application that goes through a process, and you show us how you're going to serve customers, you know, in a situation where you're occupying the dwelling and you're providing a meal as part of their stay there. And it can serve more than one party. So I might be able to stay there with my wife and another guest and his wife, or somebody can stay in a different room. It doesn't have to be a group that's associated with each other. So that's one of the things that separates a bed and breakfast inn from short-term rental, is the guests can be of a different nature or different, they don't have to be related or in one party. So that's a proposed change on here. We'll show how that fits into various zone districts in a few minutes. In our resort lodge cottages, we're making a couple of minor modifications here to talk about having an on-site manager or staff. We've put a highlighted area here of options that maybe we define features that are on site or make more consistent with the definition that's in the Estes Valley area. So when reading this, you might want to look at the Estes Valley definition and see how resort lodge cottages fits in. That's generally a larger use where there's a lodge of sorts, and then there might be a series of cabins or rooms that somebody could stay in. And we're updating that as we update the other occupancy type uses. And we're striking the current definition of short-term rental. That would then be replaced with some new definitions of short-term rental in a full capacity and in a limited capacity. Keeping in mind, we're still talking about less than 10 applicants and more than 10 applicants. That's what, or occupants, that's what's currently in the code. But we're also describing that there might be a limited short-term rental, which, as Ton mentioned earlier, has a specific number of days that it could be operated in a year versus a full special review. And the intent here isn't necessarily to mandate that on people, but to give options to people. So some people may say, you know, I really don't want to operate on a year-round basis because I occupy my house part of the year, and then the other part of the year I'm in another part of the state, or maybe in another state living there. And so I want to only occupy it for a certain period of time. And so with that limited short-term rental versus short-term rental, as we'll see in a few minutes, that can change the process and the degree of evaluation that goes on with that application. So it gives some options to property owners to make decisions on what best suits their needs and maybe simplifies some of the processes that they go through. So keep that in mind. It could work that it maybe in some instances where a project is in a neighborhood where a lot of compatibility or issues rise or whatnot, that maybe it does get limited down to a short-term rental, limited, but that would be a decision of generally the Board of County Commissioners in a public hearing setting. So you can see that that's been added. It talks about what that is. Again, this, and when we're talking about a short-term rental, whether it's full or limited or hosted, it's where transient guests who are part of one group or a party stay together. It's not multiple parties staying in different locations that aren't there together. It's usually one party. That means that my family and another family could go together and stay there as one group, but I couldn't stay there as one group and another group come in and stay there. that would fall under the bed and breakfast regulations. A short-term rental hosted is a new term that we're proposing to use, and the idea here is that it's a home that I live in and I want to allow somebody to come in and use my facility. Again, we're still at the 10 or guests or greater type thing, but I can provide that occupancy to transient guests for a period of time. But again, they need to come as a group, not as separate groups. Moving on, this is just under the term dwelling, given the fact that we're modifying some of our regulations, we need to come in and add some of the terminology into the definition of dwelling. So you'll see places like this where the term dwelling is being updated so that we're in alignment with what's being changed elsewhere in the code. This portion that you're seeing here is primarily around the Estes Valley group. And just so you know, we've already had a meeting with the Estes Valley group. And so we're not really going to spend a whole lot of time talking about this. So I'll just kind of skip across that and just know that it might be slightly different than what's in the remainder of the county. So short-term rentals in zoning districts outside the Estes Valley are zone districts that you're going to find in our code. And we have two sections in our code that cover those areas. And one is called Table of Allowed Principal Uses, Rural, and the other one is Urban. And we're going to go through each one of those real briefly here and talk about how those work. Listed along this top line here on here are the zone districts that exist in our rural component of our county. And they don't exist everywhere in the county, and some of them don't exist yet at all because they haven't been applied. Those are zone districts where we'll apply those to the county. And you can see some of these zone districts, like the natural resources area, has blanks in those boxes. As Ton had mentioned earlier, that means that these uses are not permitted in that zone district. Where there is text in there, that means that this use, for instance, a short-term rental, is allowed in this zone districts that are listed here, and by what process. So you can see this is an administrative special review, no special circumstances with that. If you're doing it, it's less than 10 guests. You follow the standards that are found in this 3.35A portion of our code. And if you meet them and can show compatibility, then the director is in a position that they can approve that application administratively. If it's followed by the asterisk, as Ton had mentioned earlier, that is a place where we know that we can look at it administratively, but because of potential compatibility issues, it rises to the level of being discussed and ultimately decided by the Board of County Commissioners. And then an S, we talked about that special review. That's full-on process. Planning Commission gets to hear it as well as the Board of County Commissioners. So you can see as you look through here where those uses are going to fall and by which procedure that they'll be added into there. So that's what you'll see there. There's an explanation underneath about what those processes are. When you get down to the bottom here, most of these things are just notes, footnotes to remind us as to what has changed in those portions of the code. Again, as I said, there's two different tables. There's the table of principal uses in our urban section. This you're going to find mostly around municipal areas such as Fort Collins and Loveland, possibly Berthoud and some of those places. And these are urban zone districts. And so we will allow those again in those zone districts that are appropriate. These are the ones that we selected in various areas. So feel free to take a look at that and understand what that is. In some of these zone districts, it's just not appropriate for. So for instance, you'll see here that it's not permitted in our community commercial, which is what C stands for, CC. But in the CC zone district, residential dwellings aren't permitted. And so there's no reason to provide a short-term rental where there's not a short-term, where there's not a dwelling, because a short-term rental requires a dwelling in those cases. So For the remainder of my little presentation here, before we dump it back over to Ton, I just want to talk a little bit about standards. And so several years ago, Larimer County went through the process and we adopted standards for short-term rentals. And a lot of it was developed around health and safety issues. We wanted to make sure that people were safe when they were occupying these things, these types of uses, and that the community that they were locating in felt that they were safe. And so we adopted standards that were intended to make these uses safe. And so as we've gone through this round of evaluation, some health and safety issues have still come to the surface. And so you can see here, as we create the new hosted short-term rental regulation, which was, and this includes bed and breakfast inn, what we're talking about is it describes the total occupancy, and we really haven't changed that, how you calculate that. We just question whether or not there's a need to have a maximum number of people in those at this time. But we did add, based upon information we've heard from the public, as well as from our engineering staff and our leadership, that we're concerned about where these go sometimes. And one of the issues is about floodways and floodplains. And so these regulations are now proposing that a short-term rental, just like almost every new use, regardless, will not occur in the floodway. And the floodway is generally where a flood's going to occur. There's a floodplain which contains the floodway, but then it contains also the flood fringe, which is the edges of the floodway. But it's also going to include that short-term rentals do not occur inside the floodplain, unless in the floodplain, that area outside of the floodway, unless that unit can demonstrate that the habitable space of the unit is situated high enough that it's above the high water, 18 inches above the high water mark of the floodplain. And that's usually a standard that's used by our FEMA, the Flood Emergency Management Agency, as a tool to manage what happens in and outside of floodplains. So you'll see that we've added some criteria to these definitions here. We also added this definition of information to the short-term rental regulations, and you'll see that in just a moment. So you can see here, we're just looking at the standard short-term rental now. It talks about occupancy, it talks about short-term rentals for 10 or fewer applicants, and then occupants, and then it talks about for 10 or more, and those standards are set up and put in there. And this and any other section 6 procedures means that you have to meet the criteria of our code generally for water and sewer and those types of things. So moving down through these standards, you'll see here we added that it can't be in a floodway. That was what we just discussed. We've also included that short-term rentals, they need to have a map inside them, but it needs to have a sign somewhere posted inside the property that shows, the coordinates of the place, existing mapping from each habitable room in the house to an escape route out of the house. But now we're asking for something actually a little bit more, is how do you get out of the neighborhood? We're finding that there are situations out there that people are not familiar with an area. They come up to some of these areas, and you get into some of our mountainous areas, and roads are really hard to figure out how to do that. And so there might be a map available that somebody could grab in an event of emergency, a fire or something like that, take that with them and get out and make sure that they get to a safe place, and that there's a way for them to contact the fire department or the police insurance in an event of an emergency. So that's what this really speaks to. We want to make sure that people are safe when they're staying these, and I'm sure that the people that own them would like the same. So we're just trying to create a safe scenario. Accessory living areas, those are secondary dwellings on a property, and this is to say that an accessory living area cannot be used as short-term rental, but an owner that lives on the property could occupy that while renting the principal dwelling as a short-term rental. So that's an option that's been added that wasn't in our code before. We want to We want to make sure that nuisance issues are adequately addressed, and we can't control noise, just like you guys can't control noise, but we're hoping that the owner operator will find ways using their property management and other things to minimize guests from causing excessive noise so that they can be compatible with their neighborhood and get along well, so that the people that live in the area are not impacted by these uses, as that seemed to be an issue. We updated some of the terms like solid fuel to make sure that everybody knows what we're talking about when we're referring to solid fuel places like fire pits and things like that. And so this explains that. Currently, this happens in Larimer County. We're just formally adopting it as part of the code that before you can operate a short-term rental, if you go through our process, before you can operate it, you have to do a life safety inspection. And so people say, well, why do I got to do that? It was a house that was approved by the building department in the past. I'm sure it meets all of the current building codes. Well, people modify buildings sometimes without permits. They finish basements, do things like that. And often we find that some of those improvements that are completed, such as in basements, don't have proper exiting windows or exiting requirements and don't qualify as bedroom spaces or things like that, and can't be counted for occupancy and whatnot. And so part of the life safety inspection is to make sure that all the current building codes are satisfied to ensure safety of the people that are going to be occupying. And this isn't to say that, you know, your roof is all wrong or anything like that. It's to capture things that make sure that people can get in and out. You know, do you got all the right fire extinguishers and exiting windows and various equipment in the house to make sure that it's safe. And this has come up recently, is called local roadways. It's recently come up in a couple of applications, whether or not a roadway is adequate to service use. So can the fire department or other emergency personnel, or even the person potentially occupying the use, get to the location where they need to be in the event of snow or other conditions or whatnot. And that can be the effect of multiple things, such as in this case, we've identified things like the width of the road. You know, a fire truck can only be on certain widths of roads and needs to have proper space to turn around. That's why we have a radius of 50 feet. So if it's going up a mountain in switchbacks, is there enough room for them to turn that vehicle? Do they have the right width? Do they have the right clearance? And is the grade, the steepness of the road such that people can actually pass on that in inclement weather? So these are things that are being considered. They're not absolute at this time. They're just things that have come up, and we're adding them in to see what kind of information that comment they evoke. So please share your thoughts with us on that. A short-term rental needs to have a reliable water source. We get a lot of questions from people, you know, hey, can I put my short-term rental on a cistern and, you know, haul water and do things like that? And typically that's not a reliable water source, even for somebody that's living there permanent, even though we have that occur in a lot of cases. That's just not usually a reliable water source, especially when it comes to firefighting and other needs. So item S covers that. We've had some concerns from some of our national park owners and whatnot about the location of these adjacent to natural resource areas. How do they impact wildlife, things like that? So there's the potential to contact them and understand if there's going to be any impacts with that. Item U is to cover contact with emergency personnel. We know that not all cell phone service is good everywhere in the county. Some places you can have one user and it's good, and other places it's not. VoIP service is a new type of a service that relies upon internet connection. And so long as I have an internet connection, whether it's satellite or not, a VoIP service can provide telephone access so that people can call in the events of an emergency or something like that. And that can be done through a phone that you hang on the wall that's permanent there. And so we're suggesting that that be considered a full-time service that's provided. And here's one that has options. Short-term rentals must comply with the ordinance for implementation enforcement of short-term rentals. So This gives a couple of options on ownership as to when the transfer of ownership should occur. And again, got to think about this. The last time we gave the presentation, I think people got a little bit misconstrued. Transferability of a short-term rental license is not to transfer it from one location to another. It's to keep it at the location, but transfer it between owners. And so one option that has been proposed based upon comments that we've seen is to make the transferability an option for people, but it has to occur within a certain period of time, in this case 30 days after the transfer of ownership. So if I bought somebody's short-term rental from them, within 30 days I need to contact the county and reaffirm my license with them and make sure that I have all the proper approvals in place so that I can assume responsibility for that. That's one option. Another option, which is option 2, is there is no transferability. If I purchase a property from somebody that has a short-term rental approval, I don't assume that responsibility or that license or that approval when I buy it. I need to come in and get my own approval and justify that I understand and will operate it pursuant to the rules. So this is an option. We're looking again for you to give us some comments. We're getting close to being done, and then we'll open it up for some comments. We're talking about how often should we renew licenses? So should there be an annual or every 2 years or every year renewal? What should that renewal be? We don't want to send out our inspectors every year to do inspections. So maybe it's every 3 to 5 years or something. We have a re-renewal where you get an inspection, but the rest of the time it's just a self-certified, yes, I understand the rules. I haven't changed anything on the property. I still have property management. This is their contact information. It's a reaffirmation of what's going on out there. So look at that and give us some thoughts on that. We would be happy to hear what you have to say on that. Item W is to make sure that a short-term rental, I don't rent a short-term rental from somebody and then my cousin pull up in his RV and park his RV out front and stay there in his RV. That's not what the intent is, and so item W would be that that's not permissible. And then just a couple of quick spots. Short-term rental shouldn't be used in an event space. If you're going to get an event space, you ought to get it approved as an event facility. There's ways to do that, and we can help people through that process. Short-term rentals also, should we consider any kind of energy codes or anything like that? We're opening the thoughts on that. So those are the highlights of the major changes that we're talking about, life safety issues and nuisance issues with the general regulations. We showed you the options of changing some of the uses and what those procedures will be. So that's really the gist of what's going on. The balance of this document covers the Estes Valley area, which is this area you see in this map, excluding what's in gray. That's the actual town limits, and it goes through the same stuff. It has its own listings of zoning districts and various things in there, and they're pretty much identical. There's some minor changes later on in the regulations that are there, but everything we talked about up to now will cover both places. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ton. And again, I thank you very much for your time tonight, and I look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Matt. So, and when Matt was jumping into his presentation, he did indicate that he wanted to show you all our website and where to find all this information. So I will quickly share that screen. So hopefully now you are seeing our planning projects page. So this is specific to short-term rentals. So when you come out here, you'll see at the very top here are the actual public discussion draft regulations. So here's the clean version and then the red line version. So the red line version is the one that Matt just went over. So if you would like to provide any comments, so if you don't have an opportunity or would rather not speak today during this webinar, you can send your comments via this email here, and I will show you that here briefly or momentarily on my slide. But that you can send your questions, comments all the way through the end of this project to this email. So whenever you'd like to reach out, that would be ideal. And this just gives some information, of course, on the webinars. You'll see that we are extending that comment period for the community until December 14th. We'll add an additional reminder since this little graphic will go away here soon. And then as you scroll down, you'll just see some of the background information and timeline. You can click on this and it will take you to a different page that will give you additional information about short-term rentals, including the timeline that is periodically updated. And then here we list out just all the wonderful things that we've completed. So the questionnaire and those results have been summarized, so you can see what that looks like, as well as our open houses that we had, and then the commissioners, and we have our PowerPoint presentations and what have you, and then links to pertinent sections of the code. And then down here for documents and maps. So if you want to look at any of our zoning district maps or our density maps that we have produced, those are all listed here. So and then this presentation, as well as the summary, will be posted here in due time. So once we get those done and completed, they'll be added to this list. So you can come back and reference this presentation, as well as a summary of the comments and the feedback that we receive through this process. So I'll stop sharing this screen and shift back to my PowerPoint real quick, if you bear with me. Okay. So at this time, we will go ahead and open the floor for community feedback, so the comment period. So a few things to keep in mind. Each participant will be given one opportunity to comment. If you happen to be present at our previous Estes Valley webinar last week on the 1st and had an opportunity to comment there, we will ask that you hold off and allow those who haven't commented previously to comment first. And then if we have time at the end, we can come back to those individuals that participated on the 1st to provide comment. But again, that's if we have time. So each participant will be given a specific amount of time, and in this case, it will be 2 minutes to comment based on the number of individuals, and that's how we came up with the 2 minutes. And then the more specific you can be on your feedback, the more helpful. Also, just want to keep in mind that although we're only giving you 2 minutes, which seems rather brief, we do ask that, again, you send any, if you would like to give more extensive comments, or following this webinar and after you've looked at the draft, you have more comments that you would like to provide, we certainly invite you to email your comments to this luc2020@larimer.org down at the bottom of the screen. And you can send comments throughout this entire process to that email all the way until the end of adoption. So whenever you think of something, certainly feel free to reach out there. Then if you have any specific questions, again, please provide those in the Q&A control rather than asking them during the comment period. Those Q&A we will address after. We won't address any of the questions during this webinar, but we do have a frequently asked questions sheet on that project website, and we are currently amending that with some of the questions we're receiving through these webinars. So that will be updated and then reposted. So that will be in the coming week once we get this webinar presentation posted as well. So all that will be posted around the same time. So we hope to address all your questions through that facts and questions. So I will go ahead and I think take it over to Leslie, and then just quickly, this last screen here, again, just a reminder where you'll find that our project website. Here's the link, and then again, the email if you have any other additional comments or questions following this webinar. So I will hand it over to Leslie, and we will start moving through the public comment.
Thank you, Ton. So right now it looks like there are 6 people with their hands raised, and we'll just move through them in the order of the raised hands. Elena Bonda Riva is first. Julia Henderson is after that, and then Karen Hunsberger. And what I will do is unmute you, and then Elena, you can be our first test case. You'll need to unmute your microphone, and then you can make your comments, and I will run a timer, so you'll hear a chime when the 2 minutes is up.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right, thank you all so much for the briefing. I was pretty excited to see the hosted short-term rental because I'll describe kind of what that applies to us. So the only thing we ever did with Airbnb is rent out our home when we're not there because we go between Colorado and California. And so I do have still some issues that I'll raise, but I think what I wanted to sort of raise first is I'm actually pretty discouraged hearing this. And I'm not even saying you as a team would know this, but it seems like this has been driven or informed a lot by the hotel lobby. And the reason I say this is just some of the things that you've raised. Let's just take the fire truck turnaround. If a truck cannot turn around and take care of my home now, that's a problem. That's a problem whether I'm renting it or not. And it should not be a problem that discourages or encourages. It should have nothing to do with short-term rentals. And that's what makes it look like this is very much driven by the hotel lobby. Same the internet. We actually don't provide internet because people want to spend time with their kids and their kids are always online. So we don't even have internet for us anymore. When we come up, that's part of it. Every mobile phone and service that I know will dial 911 even without reception. Emergency calls go through. And I think it's just something to think through. Those two things really irked me. And I guess broadly, I just want to say I can see that what you're trying to do is tease out a couple of things, but I'm just not sure it's there because I think what you're trying to tease out is what Airbnb started is actually an encouragement of people to run commercial businesses, full-time rentals in homes that are owned and run for that exclusive purpose. Frankly, that is not how Airbnb started. I think Airbnb started for people like us who actually like going to other people's homes. We have our knickknacks, we have our kids' art, we have floor-to-ceiling trees, and that's where we like to stay. However, all of this regulation has been very discouraging for that. Like there's no way I'm mounting an exit map, which is why 3 years ago we stopped doing this altogether, which actually reduces my taxable income for Colorado. Let's stop doing that because it's our home. We don't want to do that. So I think that the commercial businesses who need to be regulated as businesses is not clear here how you guys are teasing that out still to me.
Thank you. And if you could wrap up, that's 2 minutes. We appreciate your comments, Helena. Okay, thank you. We will move on to Karen Hunsberger is next. And after Karen will be Mark McGuire. Karen, you should be able to unmute your microphone now.
Okay, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I am very much not from the hotel industry and see a lot of these regulations as good things. Some of the areas that I think need to be more clear, though, is like, for example, you say uncompatible with this, that, or the other thing. What we've found is that when we go to these hearings and we explain how certain STRs are uncompatible, we don't have, like, it just doesn't seem to matter. And there doesn't seem to be any definition or threshold for us to define uncompatible. And so it's like it ends up being our opinion, and then we're always ruled against because then we just come off as it's like a thought or a feeling and not a fact because there's no threshold for that. Also, I'm curious if there's any desire to limit total short-term rentals in a given area. You guys have done a really good job. I like the full-time, limited, large, small. That's exciting. I think that's a good direction to go in. But what about total STRs, like percentage of total homes in an area that can be an STR? They've shown that after a certain threshold of STRs, that's when you start to see like crime and you start to see the breakdown of communities. And there's a lot of studies that have been done on that. And it seems like we could benefit from saying that there's also limitations on if there's 2 other STRs in the area, maybe that's another threshold for judgment. So I was curious, if maybe that's something else in addition to, large, small, et cetera, that could be added total STRs in an area. And then also, I think it's interesting that you guys are worried about floodplains, but you're not worried about WUIs. We are more in danger of wildfires than we are floodplains. And for those of us who live in the wildlife urban interface areas with ISO scores of 10, that's a more clear and present danger than a floodplain. I find it interesting that you've put in safety as a priority, and you've said that flooding is, you won't let them do it in a floodplain. But obviously a WUI is just as dangerous. So I think you guys are going in the right direction, but I still think a lack of definition can continue to create loopholes for some of these approvals. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments, Karen. Mark McGuire will be up next, and then Vanessa Mansell after that.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank
Okay,
you.
good. Yeah, I had an Airbnb back in 2021 for the summer, and it was going quite well. And then the county shut us down in April with the regulations. Anyway, it's just up here in Red Feather and Crystal Lakes. It's very simple. We just do it during the summertime. And I manage the property, which is common for Airbnbs. We're about an hour and 20 minutes from the property where we actually live in Southwest Loveland. But now the requirement is that I have to have a property manager within 1 hour. Well, number one, I'm the property manager, and I can be up there probably much faster than anybody else can actually get up there. And also in Red Feather, there's not a whole lot of options for property managers. So I think that restriction is just unreasonable. And maybe it could be like Larimer County. The requirement is Larimer County or within an hour and a half. So the people that live in northern Colorado and have mountain property can manage their own property, because I can't afford to hire a property manager, quite honestly. Defeats the whole purpose of an Airbnb. So and it also seems to me like you're trying, like unintentionally perhaps, but you're really putting your very simple Airbnbs out of business. And I don't know if it's the hotel lobbyists or where it's coming from, but some of the safety restrictions I understand make sense, but gosh, it's really tough for just the guy that wants to run a simple Airbnb. Also, the flood, we are on the North Fork of the Poudre. We're not in a flood plain. And now it seems like there's a floodway regulation. So I don't even, now what does that mean? I can't, this place is never flooded. It's been here for 45 years.
Thank you, Mark. That brings you to your 2 minutes. We appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Vanessa Mansell and then Jan Nimlo after that, and then Martha Denny. And Vanessa, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
I think I unmuted it.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to comment and listen to your presentation today. I have two things I'd like to say. I really do appreciate the administrative special review process as opposed to some of the others where the residents are permitted to have a comment period when there's a permit application in near them. I think it's very important. So I appreciate that. And then on your short-term rental regulations update, which is on the page that you just have up there, the part after number 9, the other issues that are consistently identified with proposed applications. In that, you say that the STRs are currently not permitted in established floodplains. However, the regulations do not restrict or limit the use in wildfire hazard areas. The staff recommends restricting the use in extreme / very high or high wildfire hazard areas. We, in my residence, my neighborhood, would like to formally put in, and we will put this in writing, suggest that you be more specific with that and put it in the code. I would like to change the ordinance to read that if a home is on a street with 60% or more homes that are classified by the WUI report as extreme hazard or severe hazard, then none of the homes on that street should be granted the application. Because if the person down the road from me, we have no escape here. If that house catches on fire, if they are a STR and it catches, or any house really, it doesn't have to just be STR, but if that house catches on fire, there is no escape for us. And we are in making it a STR causes higher risk for the homeowners that live there. The homeowners are taking the risk by owning the home. We know that there is increased risk in the WUI area. And
Vanessa, if you could conclude your thought, please. Your 2 minutes is up. Thank you.
my conclusion of that is I would like to see you be more specific in this other issues in restricting the use in extreme heavy high or high wildfire hazard areas, and be very specific about that in using the WUI reports that the Larimer County has on every home in the WUI area.
Thank you very much.
Part of
And
this
if you would provide that in writing, that's helpful too. Thank you,
we
Vanessa.
will. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, take care. So next up, we have Jan Nimlo and then Martha Denny after Jan. And
Hi there, how are you?
hi, thank you.
Thank you for having this. This has been really informative, and I want to also thank the commenters because I think a lot of really good points were brought up. I just have a few little ones. First, as I work on my house manual, I find the amount of information that's required at those, like the ones that are required on the door, the egress map, things like that is slightly overwhelming. And I think of myself in a state of panic. And I think there's some information that could be eliminated to make it a little more streamlined so that people have a clearer idea of what they need to do and where they need to go in an emergency. I like that you mentioned that they should be grabbable by the door. I picture something laminated and just something that, you know, maybe even has a little flashlight attached to it that they can grab. And maybe even a QR code for directions to the nearest hospital and fire department, things like that. Another thing that might be great is kind of a standardized format where Larimer County provides the layout with fillable text boxes. That way every short-term rental in Larimer County has something that's the same, and there's some ease in putting it together. The other thing is, I know that there's dark sky lighting required in Estes Valley, and with typically guests requiring a little extra lighting because they're unfamiliar with the area and grounds, this would be a great way to kind of ease in some dark sky lighting regulations. That way we can make sure we keep, you know, the integrity of our dark skies here in northern Colorado as dark as we can, which is part of what, you know, brings people to our area. So we have amazing skies. I also agree with the one commenter. I wanted to kind of piggyback on this with the WUI regulations. I was running an Airbnb also in the WUI up by Horsetooth, and with the fires that we've had in the past, it is a terrifying thing to think about people coming from other places that don't understand the risk of fire danger in our area. So maybe something that could go along with the handout by the door that just states, you know, I see you're holding up your phone, blurry with your background. So just something that guests can see when they enter the house. Oh, look where I am. If there's no one to greet them in person to explain, you know, be careful with your cigarette butts. Something that they can.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, next up we have Vanessa, and then, oh, wait, we heard from Vanessa. We have Martha and then Ben.
Okay, thank you. My name is Martha Denny. I have had experience in several locations with Airbnbs, and I have a great many concerns about some of the regulations. One of the biggest concerns I have has to do with your determination that a small or limited Airbnb can house 10 people. That seems absolutely huge to me in the context of a neighborhood, and I think it would be highly disruptive. The other thing several things I would like to know. I mean, I'm assuming that renters cannot run an Airbnb and sublease. We have seen that happen in other places, and it becomes kind of an under the radar money-making scheme for people. And I'm very concerned about that. So I feel like renters and subleasing should not be allowed to run these. There has to be an owner or someone who's going to be accountable. I think that the 1 hour time limit is pretty reasonable for most people, but it has to be someone who can and will deal with situations as they arrive in a timely fashion. I'd like to know what kind of accountability there will be for landlords who do not. I recently talked to a young woman who was using Airbnbs for housing because she can't find it for her employment. And there was no heat in the house and the landlord was completely unresponsive and she had no place to go with that. The final thing I want to say is that, Airbnbs cause dead space in neighborhoods. The people who live there come and go, come and go, come and go. They do not engage with the neighborhood in the way that one builds neighborly relations over time, which is extremely important in building community. And I'm very concerned about the limiting of numbers of these things so that dead space is limited to a certain number and not something that will degrade the general quality of the neighborhood. And I would also like to say that I don't appreciate having my neighborhood and life experience commodified for the benefit of specific individuals in my area. It is not appropriate. And I feel that, it perhaps can be done well, but I see too many people with stars in their eyes about how they're going to make money from this. And they really don't care about the long-term implication that it has on the wear and tear and general degradation of community sources, community sense.
Thank you, Martha.
You're welcome.
All right. Next up, we have Ben, and then I don't see any hands from people who haven't spoken already. So if you haven't made a comment and you'd still like to, now is a great time to raise your hand. And Ben, you don't have a last name, so we'll go with Ben. If you can unmute yourself, we'd love to hear from you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Ben Nelson. Hi, everyone. I've good to see some familiar faces by now, and thank you very much for all the hard work you are all doing to lay this out. It's helped me learn a lot about this over the last several months. I just wanted to share a couple opinions on a couple items. First was, Matt, thank you for walking us through the explanation of full STR versus limited STR. The more familiar I get with that, I just want to share a comment that I'm concerned about the limited STR designation. In my world, that would be detrimental to what I'm setting out to do if limited STR was applied to my properties without me wanting that to be the case. So just an opinion or a perspective on that. Additionally, when we talked about transferable permits, I'm a fan of option 1, being able to transfer a permit with a property. I think is a great thing. If you're a responsible host, owner, and can kind of pass those safety updates or a property that's really sound onto somebody else, I think that's a good thing, not just for those involved in that transaction, but also for the community, right? Once a property is made safe for the public and is operating as a great short-term rental, I think that's a really cool thing to kind of pass that knowledge on and even market that. That could potentially drive property values up. I know when I've shopped, if I could buy a property with a permit already, that's a very valuable thing to me. Couple additional thoughts. One thing I have not come across, and maybe I just haven't seen this yet, is appropriate cigarette disposal. Just a thought, if you are allowing smoking on your property, how do people appropriately dispose of cigarette butts, cigar butts, those sort of things, so that they're not being flicked on the ground or anything like that? I'm not sure if there is already language on that, and maybe I haven't seen it, but something to consider. And last, a thought, kind of along that line, I've heard a few folks say STRs are a risk or potentially an unsafe thing in neighborhoods. From the rules and regulations I've read through, I actually want to make the case that some STRs are probably some of the safest properties in your neighborhood if they are following appropriate permit regulations.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
All right, we have Glenn Shirey and Larry and Susan Yarrington up next. And Glenn, you should be able to unmute yourself. We're not quite able to hear you just yet. We may have to come back to you, Glenn. We're not hearing you at the moment. So Glenn, I'll go on to Larry and Susan and maybe one other person, and we'll come back and try you again here in just a moment. Larry and or Susan, you have the floor if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks.
I think we're unmuted. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a lot of questions about the regulations per se, but what I have questions about is the process through which you go through to get a permit. There is no volumetric on the fees that you pay. And so $1 billion corporation pays the same thing that I pay. And we make probably, after taxes and expenses, we probably make $5,000 a year. And so to put $2,000 or $3,000 into getting a permit, because we're only halfway through now and we spent $1,000, is a burden that I don't think we ought to have to bear when we're this small. So that is my primary problem. If I could have seen at the beginning of this what the whole process is and what it's going to cost along the way, then I can make a decision better whether to start or not. That's all.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. All right. We will go to, we'll try Glenn one more time here. Glenn, if you're able to unmute your microphone, we'll try another time. Oh, there we go. All right.
Try another time.
Oh. Sounds like we might have some. We have a very bad. Unfortunately, we have a very bad connection. Okay, so we'll try to come back to Glenn again. We really couldn't hear you. So let's go to Penny Hilton and Pam Manning, and then we'll try again. Penny, if you're able to unmute yourself.
Oh yeah, actually, I've just been writing my questions in. Many of them have already been stated, so I'm good.
All right, thank you. Okay, we will go to Pam Manning next, and then Amanda Curry after that. And Pam, if you're able to unmute your microphone, then we'll.
I think I got it. Thank you.
All right.
Well, I had debated on giving comment, but I would like to just make it short. I recently invested in a property that is zoned for Airbnb in Larimer County. Have invested my entire life savings into this. And before I can even get through the process, I'm already having neighbors sending me like threatening emails about what they're going to do if I get a permit. So my problem is that the community, like if it's non-compatible, it should not be out of emotion. It should be from facts. So if someone has a problem because I have too many loud people in my house, I can see the right to appeal an Airbnb. But right now, considering that I am abiding by the law and doing everything within Larimer County's guidelines, I feel like I'm going to be shut down just because people don't like Airbnbs. And I feel like it should be based on facts. If you want to appeal me, say it's because I'm loud. Say it's because I'm not taking care of the property. But it should not be allowed, if it's the law in Larimer County, to have these Airbnbs and then have your neighbors say, well, I don't like it, and then have people losing their entire livelihood over this. And that's all I have to say, because that is happening right now with many people in Larimer County.
All right, thank you, Pam. Okay, we're gonna go back to Glenn, and then I'm having a hard time keeping track of who we've heard from and who we haven't, but I know we still have Amanda Curry on here, and Tori Alsup, and then I think I might need some reminders here about who we've heard from and haven't. So Glenn, let's give you one more shot here to see if we've got hopefully a better connection this time around.
Okay, I'm trying again.
Much better.
Okay, great. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to say this meeting's going. I think this Valley meeting, I felt it was being disabled by an STR lobby, and I appreciate the comment. Based on what I've heard here, it seems like it's their interest to express the opinion that the county is responsible for the profitability to make their investment, guarantee their income, promote the marketability. When an STR license is a license to do business, the county's responsibility is the adherence to the rules under which.
Glenn, I'm going to pause just for a minute. We're still having a pretty challenging connection with you. I think we might have to ask that you follow up in writing, just because you're cutting out. About every other word is cutting out. So really appreciate you.
All right, I'll hold my hand. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, let's go to, let's see, Penny said she was not planning to comment. Amanda Curry is up next, and after Amanda, we have Tori Alsup.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you guys for putting this together. I think it's been very helpful to just get the walkthrough of the proposed regulations. I do have a couple points I'd like to call out. The first is that I do think that the definitions or the option to have a limited STR versus the full STR does muddy the waters a bit. I would very much encourage, if we're going to put that in, that just give everyone the option to have a full STR. If they would like to only rent out some of the time, then they can make that decision. But I think that limited STR language does confuse things a bit. I also want to address the point earlier that someone had made about Airbnb, like degrading the community or lessening the community. I've stayed in Airbnbs for a good amount of time, both locally and internationally. And I think that there's really something to be said about, having the opportunity to not stay in a hotel, to learn about locals, to learn about the community, to establish that connection. And I think that, a lot of hosts are trying to do just that, right? They're trying to make a connection with other people and really welcome people into their home, not to just make money, right? But to actually have like that connection and the human experience. And I would really encourage a lot of us to think about, how we are welcoming people and encouraging, that type of sharing in our communities. Because I think that's a really important thing that sometimes gets lost in this conversation about short-term rentals. Yes, it is a money-making opportunity, but it's also an opportunity to really, really have a better understanding of people around us and to open our homes to them as well. And then finally, I do want to echo what a few others have said about wildfire regulations. I would definitely encourage that, if we're looking into floodplains, that we also make sure that guests are, safe or have an understanding of the wildfire hazards here in Larimer County. I think that that's a very fair point. So appreciate the time, and thanks for hearing me out.
All right, thank you, Amanda. Okay, We'll go to Tori Alsup, and then I think we have a few people who might have hands up who we've heard from. So we'll go through the rest of the list after that. So Tori Alsup and then Linda Drum after that. And Tori, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi there.
There we go.
Hi, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it, and it's definitely answered a lot of questions. I think some of my comments have to do more with the process of when you are going through the application. My case, we were kind of a poster child for this whole movement, to be honest with you. I went through a whole process, took a long time, 6 months, with the safety inspection, everything. I'm probably $10,000 in. I was approved by the county. And then I had some neighbors appeal the county's decision, went to the Board of County Commissioners, and we lost our case. And now I am struggling to keep this house. And I think there's a lot of people in the community think that it's only investors trying to do this. They don't see that there's actually people who are just normal people who are trying to make something happen and put their whole life savings on the line to do that. So what I'd like to say is, as far as the process goes, I know there's notes that go out to everybody within 500 feet. I know there was notes went out to about 50 people in my case, and most of the people that opposed me were about 1,000 to 1,500 feet away from my house. I typically have no neighbors, and we do have a road, and I get people's concern about the road. I get people's concern about noise, but I think as Pam mentioned earlier, let us be non-compliant and then shut us down. As far as safety goes, I think I have one of the safest houses. I did some of the most fire mitigation probably in that whole subdivision. And then another thing is people that can appeal you are supposed to pay $800. In my case, nobody paid anything. So I'm asking that any appeal that happens and goes to the Board of Commissioners, that fee be raised to $1,500, because it pales in comparison of what we pay as people applying.
Thank you, Mr. Alsup. Thank you, Tori.
Thank you.
Okay. Linda Drum is up next. And then we'll go through some other names here who may or may not have had a chance to comment yet. Linda, if you're able to unmute yourself, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So, I guess what I have to say is, I would like to know where can I find.
You're kind of fading out a little bit, Linda.
Oh, can you hear me now?
It's pretty faint. I'll pause this just for a second if you want to try to get closer to the microphone.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Are you able to hear me?
That sounds better.
Okay, so what I'd like to know is, where can I find the information that supports the need?
We're having a hard time hearing you. You're very faint. Why don't I try to go on to some other folks, and we'll come back to you if you want to try to see if you can connect your microphone. Okay, I show Julia Henderson with a hand up. I'm pretty sure we heard from Julia. Matt or Ton, do you have that? Yes? Okay. Penny let us know she had submitted questions but wasn't planning to speak. Is that correct? I'm going to go ahead and invite Penny in. Penny, I think you had indicated you just had questions.
I have been, firing them away, but I don't speak. Most of them are being covered. We don't need to go over them again.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and go on to other folks here who we have not yet heard from. I show Casey Zigray and then Janice Wexelman, and we'll go to Casey, and then we'll try to come back to Linda and see if her microphone's working a little bit better. So Casey, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comments, we'd love to hear from you.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. Just wanted to touch base on a few things regarding WUI. One, obviously, Larimer County has different campsites that are in those WUI areas today that they do have fires, and people are having fires out there in those open spaces. So the regulation on a lot of these Airbnbs is a lot more extreme than what is on at those campsites or people backpacking in that back country. So why are we inhibiting these Airbnbs in these WUI areas if we're not inhibiting the camping? It's a much safer environment. We can control those fires and things like that. So that doesn't make as much sense to me in that regard, where, you know, that's a controlled environment potentially, and we can have the correct fire pits outside for people. I had a couple other thoughts. Oh, as well as annual or semi-annual, whatever those fees need to be. I think that's a little extreme. Why do we need to have fees yearly or every other year or whatever that is? I mean, maybe every 5 years to come through, but it's not like people are changing or improving these places, and there's regulations and people monitoring those different things at the county level to make sure things are built up to those standards. So once that standards hit, why are we rechecking that? I mean, that's just excessive, and it's the hotel lobbies that are coming in and controlling that. People have put their livelihood into things. Many people have said that, and it just seems like big money's coming in and trying to hurt the small people and push them out. And I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's right. And I think Larimer County should stand with the people and be for the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Okay. So Janice Wexelman, we'll go to you next, and then we'll go back to Linda Drum. And if you unmute yourself, Janice, then we can hear from you. And we're not quite hearing from you yet. Okay, we may have to try to come back to you, Janice, in a minute. We'll go to Linda, and then we'll come back to you, Janice. Okay, Linda.
Hi, are you able to hear me now?
Oh, much better.
Okay, so I would like to know, where can we find the information that supports the need for all of these specific regulations? Like how many floods or fires have been caused or hurt occupants in an STR that that doesn't affect an occupant that's over 30 days in Larimer County since 2007 when Airbnb started? Or maybe like how many fire trucks haven't been able to turn around. I could stand behind regulations that are relevant to the actual issues that have occurred or that's imminent. But I propose that maybe instead we give a disclosure of possible risks of the specific property and let these adults who rent for a weekend the opportunity to make good decisions and be held responsible for their actions while they're there, as long as being good landlords and, you know, informing them and giving them the resources that they need. But like, really, it's just getting crazy with how regulated this is.
Thank you, Linda. All right, we will go back to Janice and see if we have better luck with Janice's microphone this time around.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very good.
Okay, so I live up in Red Feather Lakes. I'm also on the Red Feather Planning Advisory Committee. So just a couple of comments. First, the fire truck turnaround in the driveway. What size fire truck are you talking about? Ours are pretty small up here on the fire department. We have an issue in Red Feather with campers. They're all over the place. There's a lot of dispersed camping, and the residents spend a lot of time cleaning up after them. They don't hesitate to urinate and defecate along the side of the road and on the trails. So the STRs are much better regulated. And I agree with Mr. Zigray earlier, who mentioned that this is a monitored system. I'm curious as to what the process is from here. You're taking all these questions. When I go to your website, I see the questions written down, but I'm not seeing any kind of responses or replies to some of the questions that could easily be answered, such as costs involved in that kind of thing. So just curious as to where the website is, if I've missed it, or where it will be as to what we are facing as we go through all of this. And my final comment is that there's a lot of homes that when they're not occupied, they're open to theft. And that's a big problem up here in unoccupied homes. So sometimes the STR can reduce that kind of crime in the area. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janice. All right. So that brings us to 7 o'clock, which is about the time we said we'd wrap things up. We will give, we could probably give a few more folks an opportunity to chat, and then we'll go ahead and wind this down. So if anybody else is looking for an opportunity to make a final comment, we'll open this up now to about 2 or 3 more folks, and then we'll wrap up. And that's if you haven't provided a comment already in this evening. And I see Mark Zigray as one person we have not heard from. I will go ahead and unmute Mark. And you can go ahead and make your comments for 2 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Couple things. One, I see you post the different meetings that are coming up. You have one November 9th, and I was wondering what time is that? And if you would put those dates, if you would put the times as well, just as a standard, that would help. Also, you had mentioned that this meeting would be available later. Is that just the text comment, or are we able to go back and listen to the actual recording? And are we able to get also those comments that were delivered from the November 1st meeting as well? And then, just as far as a general comment, people purchase a place, whether they rent it out a year or they live there or they rent it out a week, they still have that right. They purchase that property. And I just think that people need to look at that, I think Janice's comment that, a vacant house is open to burglary. If people are up here, they're more apt to spot a fire. And I would just like to see any comments as far as safety issues, fire calls, people not being able to find addresses. And, if we can target those instead of doing a general blanket on everybody.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Concluded right on time. All right, so I don't see any other hands raised from folks who have not spoken. So I think that brings us really to the end of our evening tonight. Ton will give you some final concluding remarks, and I think that will answer some of the questions that we've seen in the questions and that have been raised tonight about what happens next and where can you find this information. So Ton, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you all for your comments. Again, following this webinar, it will take some time to go through the comments and then write a summary. So we will produce a summary based upon the feedback and what happened here this evening, and that will be then posted to the project webpage, which is the link in front of you on the screen, the lemmer.gov/planning/short-term rentals. So in addition to the webinar from this evening, so in the summary, we will present or post this presentation, as well as the presentation and summary from the Estes Valley specific webinar that took place on November 1st. So it does take some time, like I said, to process these comments and to create a summary. And then in that process too, we will address as many of the questions we can in our facts and questions sheet that is also on that project website. But again, we continuously try to amend the FAQ sheet and try to address as many questions as we can, but it will take a bit of time. So we do appreciate your patience while we develop that. And then additionally on the project website, you'll see again a link to the timeline. That timeline is updated periodically as we get new dates for meetings or work sessions, or if there's any additional public outreach, that information will be posted on that timeline. So the meeting on November 9th is the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners work session. That does start at 6 p.m. You can certainly chime in and listen to that meeting. However, it won't be open for public comment. That is a discussion between staff and then the Planning Commission on projects, but you can participate.
I'll just mention too, there are other items on the agenda for that meeting. So probably before this item will be the Estes Valley Comprehensive Plan. So it starts at 6, but this item will probably start maybe a little bit later, more like 6:45 or so.
And then that information, you can always find the schedule of work sessions or public hearing on the commissioner's website. So that information is there to connect on the planning's or Lamar County's website for the commissioners. And then the Estes Valley Advisory Committee, Planning Committee, that will be taking place. That's on the timeline, as well as Red Feather Lakes. And those are updated as well on the timeline with the time and the date. And again, if you're part of that community or would like to participate, I believe you can do so as well. And that link is on the planning website also. I hopefully gathered everything. I think some of those initial questions there, or some of those last questions. But again, project webpage is in front of you with that link. And then if you have additional questions, or if you would like to provide additional comments at any point in this process, please feel free to email them at luc2020@larimer.org. And then any of your comments do become part of the public record and the project record on this. And eventually through this process, all those comments are given to the Board of County Commissioners for their review and consideration. So again, thank you so very much for all of you for attending this evening. And we do look forward to receiving all your feedback and then processing all this information. So again, thank you for your patience, and we will get this posted as soon as we can. So thank you.
I have one quick question for Leslie and Ton. Did we allow Joe Henderson to talk? I have an email that I just picked up on in my list.
I don't have him on my list of individuals.
He was talking under Julie Henderson's name, but he never got a chance to talk, and I did. He asked, and that was it.
Okay.
He sent me an email.
Did not hear from Joe. I think we heard from Julie. So if Joe is on and he'd like to make a final comment, I think we can, if he had his hands raised earlier, we can.
Yeah, I just saw that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and open it up to Joe, since we passed over Joe earlier because you look like Julia in the list. So if you could keep your comments to 2 minutes, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. I heard several comments from people who feel like STRs need to be limited because of a number, some magical number in a neighborhood or an area. And I guess I would really hope that the county commissioners would make a decision based on merit rather than some number that somebody comes up with. And then as far as STRs that become a problem, I would really hope that not everyone is subjected to scrutiny who has an STR that's functioning properly, when if there are STRs out there that are problems for whatever reason, noise or some other reason. I mean, we're in the process of we're applying right now, and we're doing our best to get this approved. And I would just be really disappointed if there's some fixed number that somebody puts in there or some percentage that arbitrarily shows up in the code. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. All right. So I think with that, that concludes our comments for the evening and wrap up. We really appreciate you all being here and sharing your thoughts. And please, as Ton said, keep sharing your ideas, and there'll be lots of opportunities to fine tune and make this exactly right for Larimer County and different parts of Larimer County. So we appreciate your input, and keep sending comments, and we will be posting the next opportunities for engagement over the next couple of months. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Good
good
night.
night.